Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to How to Craft a Winning Go-to-Market Story. My name is Colin Mahan, and I'm a Director of Programs at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who may not know, the NASDAQ Center is a nonprofit that's building a better path for entrepreneurs worldwide by improving inclusion, access, and knowledge in entrepreneurship. As you're going to see in the chat in just a moment, the NASDAQ Center provides programs, resources, and exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. So check out those links and resources in the chat. Now, a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Firstly, let us know where you're dialing in from in the chat. See if you have any neighbors. Secondly, we're going to open up for live Q&A near the end of this presentation, so please submit those questions for us in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We'll try our best to get to them all. Now, none of what we do here at the center would be possible without all the amazing support from our sponsors, including NASDAQ, Lehigh University, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Wells Fargo, the Nareed Foundation, Walmart.org, JP Morgan Chase, BPM, HubSpot for Startups, and Google Cloud. We're humbled by their contributions and hope you're grateful too. Now I'm going to launch a couple polls to take a step back and take a temperature gauge on how we're all doing today. Now, the first poll, how are you feeling about your business? We use this information to provide the additional wellness resources and programs that we provide for you, the entrepreneurs out there in our community. I'm going to let this roll for a couple seconds. Thank you for participating. Love that there's a happy dose of optimism in the crowd, and understand that there's a little bit of survival and anxiety out there. The second poll is what's keeping you up at night? We use this data to give us the goalpost for what we should be putting on in the next couple of months. So let us know. Is it finance, sales, marketing, scale? Let's see where we're coming from. New York, Quincy, Maryland, Oslo. Ooh, nice. Good evening. Orlando, Florida. Hello. Awesome. Welcome, everyone. All right. Well, this poll looks like it's pretty full. And drum roll, finance is in the lead, followed by sales and marketing. So for those of you with sales and marketing, we have a great presentation for you, and you're in for a treat. For those of you who've got other ones that we're not covering today, trust, we will put those on the books soon. So without any further delay, please join me in giving a warm welcome to our special guest presenter today. Laura Nespoli is the founder and strategic storyteller at Mission Movement. Hi, Laura.
Hi, Colin. Thanks for having me.
So happy for this. Thanks for doing it. And over to you.
All righty. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And it's great to see that sales and marketing is on everyone's mind, because that's exactly what we're here to talk about today. So thank you for joining us. We're going to talk about how to craft a winning go-to-market story. And before we do that, just want to take a moment and ask you just to think to yourself, and if you want to share this in the chat, what connects you to a marketing story? Think back to some of your favorite advertising moments or some of the most memorable messages you've received from companies or brands. And I would love to just have you reflect for a moment on what made it so memorable. I'm seeing emotional appeal, emotions evoke, shared experiences, kindness. It's awesome. Chances are that whatever messages stand out, or ads, relatable, absolutely. Those things really connected to you because they were resonant. They connected with who you were. Great marketing stories mean something to us as human beings. And like a great story, they elicit some kind of emotion. So, this relatability, that is connection, compassion, authenticity. These are things we value, the shared values, emotional appeal at the core of it. They connected with who you are as a person. And that's truly what we're here to talk about when it comes to what it takes to craft a winning story. So just a brief introduction. I'm Laura. I'm a strategic storyteller. So I founded Mission Movement, a story consultancy, where I help founders and brands articulate their purpose stories and cause stories, and I help bring stories to life in a variety of ways through Mesh and Movement. But I'm also a strategy leader at Article Group, a marketing firm for innovative product companies. And I work with some of the big brands like Google and JP Morgan and Meta, and I help them tell their product stories. And the approach I would take on both sides of my extreme sort of purpose-oriented or technology product-oriented life is really the same. And that's what I'm going to share with you today. How do we connect stories in a way that are meaningful and resonant with your audience, whether it's your customers or some other group of stakeholders that matter to your world, to your business. At the heart of it all is this idea that storytelling is central to meaning making and sense making. There is something about narrative that communicates information in a way that is more than just a series of facts. Narrative is one of the oldest forms of connection that we have as a human race. And there's a reason stories are passed down over time. They represent who we are. So narrative really helps us relate to a message and information in a way that is deeply personal. And therefore, we hold on to the meaning much longer. It helps us make sense of things in a more resonant way. And the science of storytelling really starts in the brain. Stories have these power, this impact on us and this effect because of the way that storytelling can actually elicit different chemical reactions in our brain. So when we hear stories as human beings, it elicits cortisol, which are related to memories and how memories are shaped. Hearing stories trigger dopamine, which is related to emotional engagement, oxytocin, which is related to empathy. We can actually see ourselves in a story. And all of these three things together really help us glean an overall deeper understanding of information when we experience that information through the lens of story. And so if we think about how that applies to go-to-market story, we're going to be looking at these elements of what makes a story really resonant in the most traditional sense, and how that translates to shaping a sales marketing story. And we'll take you through all the tips and tools and structures I use in all sides of my work. So it starts here with the basic elements of a story. So every good story has a story setting. It's kind of like the once upon a time, but it's really, it's context. What's true about the world? What's happening? Where are we when this story takes place? And that translates to these 4 C's of go-to-market storytelling. Context, customer, competitive, and company is what we'll go through. So these story elements, story setting relates to context. The challenge or opportunity of our protagonists, what are they up against? What are their pain points? When we think about this in the context of our marketing stories, we relate that to our customer. What are they experiencing? What pain points do they have? In any good story, there's tension. You want to move with this character through their experience. So there's obstacles along the way. There's tensions or needs that aren't being met. And that's where we can really bring in our competitive set. What world are we operating in? And there's a few different ways of thinking about that we're going to explore in depth. And ultimately, there's a solution. And that's where your company or your product or your service comes into play, your brand, product, or service. And we're going to talk about how these 4 C's allow you to shape a strategic starting point that can translate to a purpose story, which is maybe more in the brand space. If you're the founder of a business and you're really helping, you want to be able to communicate why your company exists, sometimes a purpose story is the way to go. How do you connect your stakeholders, whether it's customers or your internal team, to the mission that you're trying to achieve with your work? That's where a brand story, purpose story really comes into play. If you're also trying to launch a product and put it out there in the world, how do you connect that product with your audience's needs, and really make it resonant and start getting to some sales and driving behavior change, driving purchase, driving mindset change. We can use these 4 C's in the product context as well. They can be applied in so many ways. A whole other topic I talk about is how to use these 4 C's for personal strength and development. But today we'll focus on go to market. So I started to mention this, but basically what we're going to look at, we use these 4 C's as the foundation to strategic storytelling. And what we're going to explore is how to uncover information for each one of these C's. I consider this a discovery process, where I explore what I call the threads of the story. They're ultimately going to be the things that you weave together. And so the 4 C's, as mentioned, the context of the story, sometimes this is cultural, sometimes it's something happening within your category. A good example is a lot of the marketing messages we saw post-pandemic had a lot of better together messaging. They were all thinking about the context of this global pandemic we had all experienced together. That's context for some of those ads that we were seeing, what's happening in the landscape. We can get more specific, and we should. It's really important when it comes to your company and your brand. Think about what's actually happening in your landscape, in your category. For instance, if you are a company that does recruitment software, context here, category is the talent marketplace is really tight. We're in talent wars right now. So things like that. There's the overall backdrop for the story. And then within that backdrop, we've got our customer, what's emotionally and functionally relevant for them. What motivators or barriers do they have that you can appeal to? We're going to explore this in depth. As we started at the beginning, talking about the marketing messages that mean something to us, a lot of the things that we heard, they were emotionally relevant messages. They really connected with us as human beings, whether connected with our values or, our experiences. But there's also a really important thing we have to consider in marketing: functional need. How do you actually deliver on a problem to solve for your customer? We're going to look at competitive. So you've got this backdrop and you have a customer and they have needs and pain points. What is the competitive set doing? How are they addressing these needs? What's the general language of the landscape that you operate in? And how do you either align with, because sometimes it's really important to be similar enough to indicate that you're in category with these competitors, but you also want to distinguish yourself enough to stand apart. And how do you want to be the brand that's selected? And lastly, of course, in the context with our customer and like what the competitive set is doing, where's our opportunity? What makes our brand or product unique? Why do we exist? What do we offer? The altitude here can change depending on the type of story we need to create, which we'll explore. But this is the starting point for these 4 C's. And when we pull all of these threads and uncover all the information, we find the right threads to weave together to create a meaningful strategic story. Rashid Tabakawala is a strategist in the marketing community. He's like a godfather of strategy. And he defined strategy many years ago as future competitive advantage. Sometimes I think about a strategy as an informed plan, but it's always with, this sense of opportunity and advantage in it. So when you think about each of these 4 C's, the opportunity is something that's culturally relevant, moves your audience to action in a way that is distinctive and deliberate from your competitors, and is also authentic and unique to your brand. Just as we saw at the beginning, I think someone mentioned authenticity matters with a connecting and relevant story, and that's certainly true. So that's what we're going to be going for here. And now we're going to break down each one of these C's, how to explore them. And then we'll look at an example of how they come together in an actual campaign that's out in the world. So this is the closest thing I can do to replicate exactly the process I take in uncovering these 4 C's. When it comes to context, I like to start with context. It just gives me a lay of the land. Oftentimes when I do projects, I'm learning about a category for the first time. So I try to get in and understand, what does the market look like? What's happening in culture that might be impacting this category? Why is now the time to tell this story? I have some cues here on the right-hand side about the way to approach what I call a discovery process. You want to think about key trends, and it's really helpful to have supporting facts to back it up. If you're going to go ahead and put your story in a pitch deck, it's often at the start of that pitch deck. This context is like, this is a starting point, a way of viewing the world in which we can all agree upon. So it really puts you and your customers on equal footing. It's not a good idea to start your story in a pitch with who you are immediately. Because you're missing the opportunity to connect with relevance, with what's happening in your customer's world. And so having these facts as you uncover your discovery process actually really strengthens your story once you go to activate it and bring it to life, depending on what format you're bringing it to life in. I say capture more language than you think you'll need. It'll just kind of help you inspire the right ways to tell your story. It'll give you a sense of the lay of the land. I say cast your discovery net wide. Gather enough interesting cultural entry points so that you can have some selection and options, because as you uncover the rest of the elements of the story, you might find one trend is certainly much more relevant to give you an opportunity to talk about a particular feature or aspect of your product that's distinctive from your competitors. So get enough in the lay of the land that you've got enough to work with. However, not so wide that your story sounds generic, which is very common. And that goes back to that idea that I feel like every category, every marketer was talking about better together in the handful of years following the global pandemic. It's really important to be specific enough to give your story a starting place that really matters for your audience. So those are the tips on getting that first C, the context. And here's a way to think about organizing yourself. Just if you want to screenshot this is like just a nice structure to use. So we're going to move on to the competition or the competitive landscape. And I think about this in two steps. So there's a lot on this slide because it's meant to be super instructional. If you are new to marketing, I want you to be able to have all the details and kind of like have my voice in your ear as you're going through this. But think about it first as step one. Who are you up against? Go ahead and focus on 4 to 5 key competitors. And also consider forces outside of your immediate competitors. Sometimes I think about competitors in kind, exact like competitors in their offering, or competitors in mind, competitors that maybe, or brands and companies that have something that really is close to, in theory, what we want to do, even if it's pragmatically a little bit different product wise. Just consider what other people are saying. And that's the second part of this first step. I go ahead and scour their language. I look at their copy on their website. Oftentimes we look at headlines on websites. That's kind of like the core of who they are. That's like their entry point into their story. And then I go ahead and look at like supporting facts. What are they saying in their public spaces online? Now with AI, this step is actually much faster. Just last night, I used Claude AI as a tool. I gave it my competitor set that I wanted to analyze. I described what I was looking for. I said, go to their sites. I think of like what is the key message that they're offering to their customers? What are some of the supporting points? I defined what I think of as a key message and its supporting points. And I said, I want to see these in a table. And AI was able to do that for me in just a few minutes, which is a starting point. It is not at all reliable on endpoint. It really takes your perspective to make sure it's accurate and right. And you have the, human intelligence to add on and pull out the right points, but it does really help get a good lay of the land quickly. Same can be said for the category part that we looked at. So once you have that laid out, step 2 is, what are they saying? This is where you're actually looking at it and What problems are they solving? What's their point of differentiation? What position are they owning? What are some key themes that stand out? And a good way to, I love fill in the blank exercises to help people kind of like focus on how to bring things to life. So some prompts you might be thinking about is everyone is centering around this point, but no one is addressing it this way. Or everyone's making it about this problem, but it's actually about this problem. So within that exercise, you look for white space. And if there's a key part of your story that you don't see being represented, then that's definitely an opportunity you want to consider when you pull your threads together. It's also really helpful for competitive to just look at whether there's certain mandatories. Are there table stakes? But it's important to mention them to make sure you stay in category and be clear on how clients should be thinking about your offering. If you're so distinctive in how you position your story, you might position yourself right out of the consideration set. So there's that to be considerate of. And so this is what that table looks like, as I mentioned. What's the key message? What's their core value proposition? What kind of supporting messages are there? And once you have that filled out, look for some trends and themes across them. And then I've given a snapshot here on a worksheet for, those like, what are their stories? What are some themes? Is there white space? Are there mandatories? So, now we're going to move on to your brand, your product. This is the most reflective point. And this particular set of questions I have here are especially for founders really trying to uncover their core brand story. But it's really about asking yourself and your team and your best customers and clients, those who've really experienced your brand, some key questions to help you identify the unique threads that stand out in your story. I think this takes some deep reflection work. Spend some time immersed in it, leave, come back. I often find when you're swimming in a discovery process or asking yourself some questions, and we'll look at the questions in just a moment, you kind of ask yourself and then you answer them, but then like 5 hours later, you might be cooking dinner and all of a sudden a new realization hits you. So I think when it comes to uncovering what's really unique about your brand story, it really helps to give it a little bit of breathing room. It also is super, super helpful if you have people outside of your founding story, like your customer's perspective of you might be different than your perspective of yourself. And then these questions that I've included here, this is actually a starting point for the interview that I use when I'm interviewing founders to really help them uncover their story. And it really, you'll see as we move through this, the structure that this ultimately leads to is a story in a page that sets up, here's what we believe to be true about the world. And therefore, our purpose is to do X, Y, and Z. And we do that purpose by doing these pursuits, what we do, how we do it uniquely, and the impact we have. But these stories have been, or these questions rather, have been incredibly helpful. They are just as applicable for a fintech that is developing a new product that kind of changes the way savings and investment is done to the starting point for a nonprofit founder who is also an artist and a professor. And he said these questions actually helped him get to an understanding of himself that no one else has really asked about. So there's just, because they're so intrinsic to like what's truly core to who you are, they're really great at uncovering like why you exist and your intent. So what drives you and motivates you to build your business or do what you do? What's true about the space that you're in that you hope to change for the better? How do you personally define the mission or purpose of your brand or work? And try not to get too hung up on language while you're doing this. Just get your sentiments out and then say them a number of different ways. And we'll look at that in a second. What thoughts or feelings do you want your clients or people to have when they come in contact with your brand? And then just more functional, what is it that you offer? How do you do it differently? And why does that matter to your clients? here's a great, if you want to take a screenshot of this, it's a really great workshop sort of exercise. Some, again, prompts. I love fill in the blanks or giving you some prompts. If you think about this structure, I believe this to be true because to kind of get at that never ending why. And so it gives you like different ways of exploring the language. My belief that blank has led me to do this. Or I believe that because our world is so disconnected and polarized, I really feel it's important to unite people with story. When we believe X, we are capable of Y. So these are just some relationship statements that can really help you uncover your belief and purpose sentiments. And I would say that the beauty of doing it a number of different ways or having it done with different either stakeholders within your company or hearing your client experiences on this, it's going to give you a lot of different language. And like I said, walk away, take a walk, come back, get messy. I always say this discovery process gets messy until it isn't. So sometimes it's really helpful to unearth, and then you'll get to greater clarity. So now we're moving on to our customer. Give the people what they want. So we talked about earlier emotional resonance, but also really important to hit on functionally what they're looking for so that you can speak to those things. We think about what's going to motivate them to make a decision to go with you, and what barriers do they have to choosing you or giving you their business. You get to know your audience, shape a persona of the ideal person you want to reach with your story. Again, if you have clients or friends willing to chat with you, it's a great way to understand what prompted them to use your services and offering. And this is a great worksheet for this. Again, I use this structure whether I'm working with a global technology brand, trying to launch a new tech product in the world, to working with a solopreneur who's trying to articulate their purpose story. At the end of the day, this is what's most important. As we started with, the power of story is about creating empathy, and really connecting with your audience. And so it's so important to put that human at the center of your storytelling, not your brand. Ultimately, you want to tell your brand story paired up with really why it matters and why it's going to have impact for your audience. So those two things fit together. So every time I do this, I think about what's on their mind, motivations. Why would they say yes to your offering? What are they looking for? What needs do they have? Or what pain points do they have? Like, what kind of problem are they trying to solve? And barriers is really important. What would prevent them from saying yes? Because the barriers aspect, sometimes you'll see when this comes together with when the threads in our strategic center, sometimes we really want to dial up the motivation, but sometimes our barrier is so big that we just have to go straight at that barrier, and be really explicit about that. We want to think functional needs, but there's always latent emotional needs behind it. So what's happening in their hearts that you can deliver for? A really great example of this is in B2B technology. Tech buyers are certainly, they have a lot of specificity they look for when purchasing big enterprise products. There's a lot of technical detail. There's so much that needs to go into an evaluation of the right product and service for them. But there is also a lot of emotional risk on the line. When you're buying a CPG product, a consumer packaged good at the grocery store, it doesn't matter if you choose the wrong deodorant for yourself. But if you choose poorly on a multi-million-dollar technology investment, there's a lot on the line. So even though it might not always be obvious, and even when we need to communicate really technical information in communicating our product story, you really should consider emotional needs, whether they're latent needs that the audience doesn't even recognize, but things like what sort of confidence do we need to convey that impacts the tone in which we deliver our story? Is fear going to work in terms of connecting with people. And I will say right now, even though some marketers really lean on fear of not choosing the right thing or not choosing their brand, when it comes to fear as an emotional motivator, it is not nearly as powerful as things like surprise or confidence, or even Schadenfreude, which is kind of a comedic laughing at someone else's expense, but Schadenfreude in a marketing campaign for a less serious product can really move the needle in terms of emotional resonance. And then once you have this snapshot, I try to look for just a single statement, insight, or articulation that we can factor into our storytelling. What pains do they have, gains that you can offer, or job that you can help them solve? So I'm going to stop there for a moment. This is kind of like the value proposition. If you line up their pains, gains, and job with your service offering and what you sell, you can start to find out, like, where do you find the connection from one to the other? Okay, so that's a lot of depth and detail on how to gather those 4 C's. Now here's how they come back together. So remember, we said you find the threads that are culturally relevant, distinctive, deliberate, moves your audience to action, and authentic to your brand. And it's really kind of like, if this is true about the world we operate in, and our competitors are only talking about this way, but our audience really needs this, then we should really lean into this aspect. And here's our market message. And these come to life. These are another couple money screenshots for you. A brand story in a page framework. I mentioned before that belief, and therefore we exist to do this with our pursuits or commitments, these truly differentiating characteristics, and our personality. So all of the questions that we covered are like a really good foundation for this, but factoring in what you found about the category and your competitive set and what your audience needs, your customers. So what are you here to do for them? And the commitments, how can you do that uniquely for you? Another angle on this looks very similar to the previous page, but it's actually more specific to a product story. So with a product story, we really get to a more explicit, punchy statement from a value proposition, matching that customer need with your products. And that gets you to like a simple headline that nails the promise. And then a positioning statement, a more descriptive statement. What do you do, for whom, and how? And your pillars. These are mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive statements. They might be that your product delivers on this value proposition with flexibility, helpfulness, and seamless experience, as an example. And then proof points to back up those statements. How does flexibility come to life in your product? Are there certain features that you can highlight here? Are there case studies within your user stories that you can use when you're developing your story? So those are the 2 frameworks. Now I'm going to show you a brand that has done this really, really well with Hinge. Mind you, it's must say here, I had nothing to do with Hinge's advertising or marketing. I just thought it was a really brilliant marketing story. And man, you can see how these 4 C's come to life so well with their tagline, designed to be deleted. So Hinge is a dating app, and they're the dating app designed to be deleted. And here's how that makes sense. If we think about the category, digital dating is ineffective and addictive. And this is actually proven in research that the dating apps and the swiping, it actually just leads to people getting more addicted to meeting the next person out there. And they often have trouble once they meet someone they really like, they're still thinking about the world of options available to them. So that ineffective and addictive. And yet dating apps are really, they recognize that context, and they're like trying to focus on quality relationships. If you see eHarmony, get the one that gets you. That makes total sense for who we are as human beings. But for Hinge, they wanted to stand apart. And they tapped into this customer insight that people are so busy matching and they're stuck on the apps that they're not actually connecting in person. Meanwhile, they actually built their technology on a belief. So if we think about their purpose story, they have a belief that anyone looking for love should be able to find it. They also have a product story that this was built on Nobel Prize winning algorithm. And so they're so confident in the algorithm of their technology that they're going to, like, their app is designed to be deleted. And you can see how ineffective and addictive. So getting the app out of your life. And it's not about, like, they're actually turning the focus away from the relationship itself. And like that sort of, they want to actually get something that works so well, you don't need the app anymore. Which I just think is so brilliant. So if you out there are related to Hinge in this campaign, kudos. It comes to life in connected TV ads where we see designed to be deleted. And then if you're a user and you're like, wow, that's amazing. And then you go to their website and they build on that storyline, go on your last first date. And you're like, yes, please, let me go to the app store. And then they reinforce that key storyline designed to be deleted. But this is where they get into more of the product details. Go beyond photos, see who likes you, skip the small talk. So let's look at how that centering story designed to be deleted, why it comes to life the way that it does in these various places. So story across the marketing ecosystem. Here's another framework I use in just about every project I work on. Once you have your core story, it has to come to life in different ways because your different channels and tactics that you use they serve different roles in the overall journey. And when we think about a very general journey, we think first you're creating brand awareness. Hopefully we move people to consideration. And once they've done some consideration and some research, hopefully we can convert them. And from that conversion, we create advocacy and loyalty. Now, remember, we looked at our customer and I said mindset, barriers, motivators. When we use those, I actually lay that out for each stage of the journey. What is the key barrier in getting them to move from awareness to consideration, from consideration to conversion, et cetera? So the messaging really starts from that core story, but evolves and changes shape based on where they are in the decision journey. And here's a little bit more detail on this. Is actually from McKinsey, their loyalty loop. They say you trigger consideration, then this is kind of like the awareness point, and they start to consider and they go through this active evaluation set. Then once you convert them, they go to that advocacy loyalty stage. And if they're doing it right, they actually trigger new people to consider and start their cycle, but they'll also swing back around in this loyalty loop themselves. So I unravel that to show this in a linear fashion, but all that to say, it is not necessarily linear. These things should constantly reinforce a story that you have, and you should consider how your story lives across the life cycle of the relationship you have with your customer. And so here's how the story comes to life in different ways. We think about the balance. We talked about emotional and functional. As human beings, we make emotional decisions first. So when we're creating awareness, that's when we see big brand ad campaigns using humor, using emotional appeal. But as you move through a marketing ecosystem, once you get to the website, once you see some digital banners, you might see more product specificity because they're starting to bring in more rational product activation language. So again, it's all from the same story, but you see different language come into play because as you move to conversion, the balance shifts from emotional to really rational, active decision-making on the product. And at the end, they really know who the product is. And of course, you still reaffirm your emotional connection, but you're really delivering on the value that you deliver in your product and service offering. And so using that Hinge example, here's how it was just that great ad campaign designed to be deleted. Once you go to the website, they reinforce that level, so it's part emotional. Go on your last first date. If you're frustrated with the apps, you're like, yes, I need that. But then they also back it up with technical. Hinge is built on the belief that anyone for looking for love. They talk about their Nobel winning prize or Nobel Prize winning algorithm. So we can succeed in getting you out on promising dates and not keeping you on the app. So they're really starting to get into the language. And once you go to download that app, they're giving you the very specifics on what the app does and the benefits you'll get out of it from a product perspective. So I just captured some of this, the emotional brand side. Hinge wants you to meet someone great, even if it kills us, because when you find the real thing, you won't need us anymore, which is kind of the point. Hinge, the dating app designed to be deleted. So their brand belief, anyone looking for love should be able to find it. You can really feel that coming through here. And the emotion connects to the customer, their frustration in a humorous and surprising way, which, as I mentioned, really moves people to action. On the product side, once we start digging into the details, go beyond photos, see who likes you, skip the small talk, the dating app for people who want to get off dating apps. So it's product proof points and benefits there. It's a lot to cover here. So I think we have a good amount of time for questions, and I know that it's just a lot of ground that we explored together. I hope you took some screen grabs, and we can certainly open it up now.
Awesome. Thank you, Laura. Valuable insights across the board. And there's some questions, but if you haven't asked a question and you've got one, I know the poll said sales and marketing was a big one. So ask them for Laura in the Q&A box and we'll hope to get to them all. Let's see. I'm not familiar with Claude AI. Of all the options, why did you choose that particular service? Thank you.
So I actually, when I'm in StoryWork, I use a handful of AI tools now. I'm exploring what they do. Gemini, Claude, I have a research tool called Waldo.fyi. I think they all have, they each have their own algorithm. And I'm also just exploring and learning how to use AI. So I think it's important to like draw inspiration from it. But ultimately, I do the human work to check my work and reinforce it. But so I don't necessarily have preference for Claude, although I have found that Claude is able to create tables and even charts and graphs. I've asked it to create like I've uncovered criteria, and I've said if you were to create a 2x2 box of like the most important criteria for this customer, what would it be? And the tool can do it. So I've found that it is a little bit more sophisticated in what output it creates.
Awesome.
Does this mostly apply to B2C or B2B? And if not, how does it differ? It applies to both, certainly both. I think it applies to any storytelling aspect because at the heart of it is really foundational to like just it goes back to those storytelling elements and what it takes to create resonance through story. I've used this framework for all of the above, B2C, B2B. I've used it in helping professionals tell their professional story, not even for a product or service. And I've also used it for artists and nonprofits. The principles remain the same.
Awesome.
Um,
And also, I just dropped a couple of links in the chat. One of our advisory board members here at the center has a newsletter where he looks at the latest and greatest AI marketing tools, and he also has a very awesome marketing tool database, all free. The tools aren't all free, but it's a great resource for you to see what's on the horizon for AI and all the great things.
awesome.
Uh,
Thank you, Lauren.
More questions. What books, resources would you recommend on this go-to-market process for a deeper dive?
You know, I don't know if there's any books that talk about this, which
Hey, maybe that's a signal. You got to write one.
I know I've already I'm writing a book about these strategic principles and how they apply both to professional and personal growth and development. But it's, hard to write a book when you do all the things. But yeah, I'm not sure if there is a book that talks about this in more depth. So thank you, Rosa, for highlighting that opportunity for me.
Yeah, just add to your list.
Um,
Question here from Robert. How does go-to-market strategy work if you're selling to users or the user's employer and not the actual end user? Who do you market that to?
yeah, that's a really great question, Robert. So, you know, the layers of audience, this is where you would certainly want to build out two persona snapshots. So when we think about that customer C, go through your end buyer and then the people they are serving. For example, if you're thinking about an enterprise buyer, but then they have employees as an end audience, you want to look across both of those. Sometimes that might require that your messaging, your ultimate strategic story has to factor in a through line or consistency between the two, or you kind of decide like what's the entry point, but then as you bring your story to life across that marketing ecosystem, you dial up your proof points and maybe some materials that will help the end user. For example, we talked about selling enterprise technology. A big pain point for a lot of tech leaders is that they will buy the tech products, but then their end users don't feel secure enough to use it or use it properly. And then the investment really suffers, like the perception of the ROI on the investment suffers, and that IT leader is in a bad way. So then you want to consider tools and materials that help their end employees and users start using the tools.
Awesome.
Um,
Let's see, rolling down the list, keep them coming. They're all good. Um, how do you feel about including stories on CPG products?
I think it's just as important. Factor in what what's resonant with the customer. I think CPG is actually fun territory because you can actually play on certain cultural threads, what's really active in the world. You can play depending on the type of CPG and how much product detail you have to include with it. Certain things like, food and beverages, you can really play up a moment and humor and different aspects to draw attention. And that's where buyer's mindset connects with your story just because it's of interest to them. It's fun, it's funny, it's relatable. It's not huge impact on their life. And I think there's just a lot of room to be use the emotions of entertainment more so than like really instilling confidence that when they visit your burger joint, they will get the best burger, low risk.
I love that. Great advice. Let's see another question here from Stephanie. As a small brand, a lot of the brand story is driven by my personal experiences and frustrations. How should I separate personal story and brand story, or should I?
Oh, that's a really great question, Stephanie. So my company, Mesh and Movement, I talk a lot about the work I do at Article Group, which is one thing. But Mesh and Movement, if you go to my website, like Mesh and Movement is all me. I started the company with a partner who really saw my vision for what I wanted to build. And at a certain point, we realized like it just didn't make sense for both of us to be in the business. Meshin was me, it was my work output, and it was definitely, he said to me, like, it's like Meshin is you. And I think that there's the story, my purpose story. I unite and rally people, I inspire movement through shared meaning and story. And that purpose is definitely an articulation of my professional work. It certainly helps me feel fulfilled, even in the tech marketing work I do, using story to create behavior and movement within people that way. But it's also totally who I am as a person. And I don't think if you're a small brand and you are the representation of your brand, I don't think that's a bad thing. And I think you can kind of lean into it to a point. I think at a certain point, if you grow and have employees coming on, I think you have to still stay grounded in your customers' needs. And some of those audiences are your own internal stakeholders. What's a purpose articulation that your whole team can stand behind and is true to the work you're doing, and not just you, Stephanie, an individual.
It's great advice.
I hope that helps.
It does. Let's see. I feel that my brand fills a gap, but I am not sure which angle to take when reaching big box stores. would you suggest leaning into my story more to build engagement? And then a follow-up on that one, they had the same question, but on this, could we do the same thing for email campaigns?
Mm. So yes, on the email campaigns, like I think you just adjust your altitude and the strategy you're going for based on what you're trying to achieve in email. I'll tackle the big box question. I don't see it anymore.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, no, yeah, I'll bring it back. It's in the
um,
answered pile
gotcha.
from
Okay.
Cassandra.
Um, my brand fills a gap, not sure which angle to take. I mean, that's the thing. There's always multiple angles that you can take when you're telling your story. I think when it comes to reaching big box stores, work backwards from what's going to get them to say yes. Start at the end point, determine what they need, and then think about that relative to what your competitors might be offering, who's on the shelves, what else they might be saying, and try to articulate for the partner, the big box store, where you're distinct and how you bring something different they don't already have on shelf. So I really start at it, like lean into where they are and start at your endpoint versus starting with your brand and what you do. And still use the 4 C's, but I think it's just really like what angle you take. Because again, that's the beauty of that structure. There's a lot of different ways that that structure can work for you, and you can dial certain aspects up and down depending on the situation.
Awesome. Another question here. What's your advice on go to market during MVP testing? Ooh,
Um, Test.
yeah.
Like uh I think your MVP testing is a great way to understand resonance, for your product. If you have the capacity to test concepts with your ideal customer profile, do it. And even if that's a small test, I mean, that could be as small as like a handful of like if you have a network and community and can ask people who are close to that ideal customer profile. Yeah. But if you can test your go-to-market story just to get that product to launch, I think it's helpful, and explore different messages that resonate. If you're doing this in a social capacity, which ads got the most clicks? Like what drew the most attention? Do a little A/B testing.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think in your MVP testing is a great time to start taking notes on what's going well and what's not.
Yeah.
Let's see. Some of my pain point, or one of my pain points, is that I sell mostly commodity products. How do I tell a story when it's such a saturated market?
Um, oh,
And I don't know
commodity
what.
products. Yeah. Oh, I'm all over this, Rosa. Yeah, commodities really tough. I think this is where, again, kind of the same response on working backwards. Um, Look for what's not like the differentiated element that's being called to the surface. There's two mindsets here. At a product level, elevate the differentiated aspect of your product if there is one. If not, lean into your brand. Why does your company exist? What makes it emotionally relevant? And is there a role that you want to play in the larger purpose that you serve, that's going to connect with someone emotionally if the like for like on the product aspect is 1-to-1.
Mm, yeah. And they're just saying, yes, thank you. That was a perfect answer. Um, this one's just a mere curiosity from Andrew. How did you come up with your company name?
Oh, great question, Andrew. I was at a creative firm and I had this vision for a meal experience that had narrative woven into it. Every part of the meal experience had a connecting element to it. So unraveled meaning and messages all about connection. And I realized like I wanted to create this thing that paid this experience forward to nonprofits. So the nonprofit message would be woven into it. So all that to say, it was all about leaving and starting something that was purpose oriented. And I have there's a Buddhist monk, Thich Nhat Hanh, who has a saying that a single grain of rice contains the whole universe. Like rice is so deeply connecting to all of us. It's like the sun and water and earth it takes to grow the rice, but rice is like a staple. It's like a canvas for so many different cultural foods. And so meshi in Japanese means rice and meal. And I thought meshin as a conjoin really has this nature of connection woven into it. So meshin movement really is grounded in that principle of connection. And that's what I'm all about, is inspiring movement through shared meaning and story. It's all about connection.
Oh, I love that. No, I love that story. I would have never guessed. I
Mhm.
do know a little bit of Japanese, but definitely not that much. We are almost at time. And so thank you so much, Laura. We really appreciate it. If you want to connect with her on LinkedIn, we just dropped some links in there. Laura, if you had one gold nugget takeaway moment, what would you have everyone come away with today?
Oh gosh. um, there's so many different ways to use the tools that I gave to you today. And it's not totally prescriptive, but the principles are there. So there's really any story you need to tell. I'm even looking at the final question on a grief recovery specialist. Go, look at the four C's, look at what's resonant for your audience. You can adjust the dials and the principles are there. It really is, it can work in so many different ways. And like just philosophically, I do believe that story is a way to connect us and unite us. Um, I've I've done story work for my region in Greater Rochester, New York, and like even in that way, I think the power of story is so important for us to connect as human beings. And so, yeah, the principle applies at so many different altitudes. There's no limitation.
Amazing. Well, we're all looking forward to your book on this. But thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. For those of you who are still on the call, we appreciate you joining. Hopefully, this is valuable. Laura, thanks again for the time and wisdom. And for all of you, we'll see you back online soon.
Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate it.
All right.
Bye.
Have a good one, everyone.
Bye.